John Adler was accustomed to predictable answers. At 32 years old, founder of Iron Wall Technologies, the largest cybersecurity company in northern England, he had transformed codes into millions, algorithms into an empire. His routine was meticulous. Wake up at 5 in the morning, run 10 kilometers through Hagen Park, review reports during his shower, black coffee without sugar. Total control, always. That Thursday in March, in the auditorium at the University of Manchester, he expected the usual questions about investments, about technology, about the future of the digital market. 500 people packed the space, mostly computer science and engineering students. The air conditioning battled against Manchester's damp cold and the collective anxiety of those wanting to impress the youngest billionaire in the north of England. What he didn't expect was a girl in worn trainers and a patched rucksack, sitting on the floor because there were no more chairs, raising her hand with the naturalness of someone who had nothing to lose, and asking, "Have you ever failed, sir?" The silence that followed was deafening. 500 people held their breath. John, who never hesitated, who had built his reputation on the ability to find instant solutions to any problem, was speechless for 3 eternal seconds. His grey eyes met hers, brown, bright, completely devoid of the reverential fear he was used to inspiring. "Excuse me?" he asked, though he had heard perfectly. The question had ricocheted in his mind like a stray bullet. "Failed," repeated Elke Eppinger, 23 years old, public administration student, who had signed up for that lecture out of pure academic curiosity and was now questioning a billionaire as if she were talking to her neighbor. "Everyone here wants to know how you won, what strategies you used, what codes you cracked, but I want to know if you've ever lost, and what you learned when that happened." John felt something strange in his chest. Not irritation. He knew that well. It was interest. How long had it been since someone surprised him? How long since someone looked through the carefully constructed persona of the invincible CEO? In the front row, Hugh Matthews, director of operations at Iron Wall, frowned. That wasn't the question he had planted. He had bribed 3 students to ask technical questions that would highlight John's genius and, consequently, the importance of his own position in the company. "Interesting question," murmured John, adjusting the microphone with more force than necessary. "But I think you're in the wrong place. This is a lecture about digital security, not about group therapy." Some nervous laughter echoed through the auditorium. Elke, however, wasn't intimidated. If there was one thing life had taught her, it was that powerful people were, deep down, as insecure as anyone. They just had better resources to hide their vulnerabilities. "It's just that I think the two things are connected," she said, standing up with the gracefulness of someone in no hurry, ignoring the curious glances from her colleagues. "You talked about building digital walls, about protecting data, about shielding systems against external attacks. But those who have fallen know where the holes are. Those who have never failed, well, maybe they're just waiting for the fall to come." The auditorium became electrified. John felt his familiar world tremble like a house of cards. That girl, who probably didn't know the difference between a firewall and a brick wall, had just questioned not only his lecture, but his entire life philosophy. The philosophy he had built after his mother's death, when at 22 he had to take over the family business and discovered that vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. The philosophy that had made him dismiss 15 employees in the first year because compassion doesn't generate profit. The philosophy that kept him alone every night in a 300-square-meter penthouse surrounded by technology and empty of humanity. Hugh whispered something in a colleague's ear, making discreet gestures in Elke's direction. John caught the peripheral movement and felt an inexplicable irritation. Hugh had always been too clever for his own good. "What's your name?" asked John, coming down from the stage with calculated steps, like a predator assessing its prey. Elke Eppinger." "Well then, Elke Eppinger." He stopped 2 meters from her, close enough to see the small freckles on her nose, far enough to maintain control. "How about we test your theory in practice?" She tilted her head. curious like a cat that had just found an interesting ball of yarn. "What do you have in mind, sir?" "An internship. 3 months in Iron Wall's strategic core. Let's see if someone who talks so much about failures can survive in an environment where error is not an option." The murmur in the auditorium increased. Daphne Clark, Elke's best friend, who was sitting in the third row, made a face that said, "You've gone completely mad." But Elke had already made her decision. That's how she worked. Heart first, logic after. "I accept," she said, extending her small, calloused hand. He noticed the scars from when she worked part-time in a printing shop to pay for university. "But with one condition." John raised an eyebrow. Nobody put conditions on him. Nobody had dared to do that since he took command of the company. "If I manage to last the 3 months, you answer my question. Honestly." He shook her hand, feeling an inexplicable electric discharge at the contact. Her skin was surprisingly smooth, despite the marks of work. "Deal." When the handshake lasted a second longer than professionally appropriate, Elke felt a strange warmth rise up her arm, and John, for the first time in 10 years, forgot for a moment that he was being observed by 500 people. When Elke left the auditorium, accompanied by the flood of curious colleagues and Daphne's hysterical questioning, she didn't know that Hugh Matthews was already calculating the possibilities of that unexpected situation. £50 says she won't last 3 days, he bet with 2 colleagues in Ironwall's corridors later that night. But it wasn't money that motivated him. It was the perfect opportunity to get rid of someone who could interfere with his plans for the company's IPO. And John, driving his BMW through Manchester streets that night, passed through Chorlton 3 times without apparent reason, while a voice at the back of his mind whispered questions he didn't want to answer. Why did he accept? Why couldn't he stop thinking about those brown eyes? And why, for the first time in years, was he genuinely curious about what would happen the next day? In the small flat she shared with Daphne, Elke was lying in bed, looking at the cracked ceiling with Ginger, her cat, purring on her chest, trying to process what had just happened. "Do you realize what you did today?" asked Daphne, appearing at the door with 2 cups of strong coffee. "I think I just changed my life," replied Elke. "I just don't know if for better or worse." Knowing you, probably both at the same time. What neither of them knew was that that handshake had sealed much more than an internship. It had sealed the destiny of 2 people who were about to discover that the best revolutions begin with a simple question, unexpected courage, and the willingness to face truths they'd rather avoid. Monday, 6 in the morning. Elke was standing in front of the scratched mirror in the bathroom she shared with Daphne, trying to tame the curly hair that insisted on having a life of its own, when the reality of what she had done began to materialize in the form of pure panic. "Are you sure you haven't gone mad?" asked Daphne, appearing at the door with a mug of strong coffee and the face of someone who had slept 3 hours thinking about her friend. "Because accepting a challenge from an arrogant billionaire doesn't seem like the most sensible thing in the world." "Since when am I sensible?" Elke applied lipstick for the 3rd time, trying to hide her nervousness. "Besides, it's just an internship. What could go wrong?" "Everything," replied Daphne, with the brutal honesty that only best friends can deliver. "Especially with a guy who's famous for eating interns for breakfast and using their bones as toothpicks." Elke laughed, but the sound came out somewhat forced. Actually, she had spent the weekend researching John Adler on the internet. What she found was disturbing. A brilliant, ruthless man who had built a technological empire practically alone, but whose personal life was an absolute mystery. No public relationships, no scandals, no apparent weaknesses. It was as if he were made of marble and calculations. 2 hours later, Elke was on the 33rd floor of the Metropolitan Building in Manchester's financial heart, discovering that John Adler's reputation was actually underestimated. Iron Wall occupied 3 entire floors of the city's most modern building. Glass walls that seemed endless, cutting-edge technology that made NASA look antiquated, employees who looked like they'd stepped out of a business magazine, all impeccably dressed, all speaking in codes and acronyms that sounded like an alien language. Elke, in her 5-year-old blouse, the most elegant she owned, and shoes that had seen better days, felt like a fish out of water, or rather, like a fish out of water in an aquarium full of sharks. "You must be the famous questioner," said a voice behind her, loaded with a tone that managed to be cordial and threatening at the same time. Elke turned and found a man in his early 40s, a suit that probably cost 3 times her rent, a smile that didn't reach his calculating blue eyes. "Hugh Matthews, Director of Operations. I've heard a lot about you." "I hope good things," she replied, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "Let's say interesting." Hugh squeezed her hand with unnecessary force, as if testing her resistance. "John is in a meeting with Japanese investors. Time zone, you understand. How about I show you where you'll be working?" The where was a shock. A small room, windowless, with a metal desk that seemed to have been rescued from an 80s office, and a chair that creaked threateningly when she sat down. On the desk, a pile of documents that seemed to have been assembled by someone with questionable sense of humor. Security reports of 1,000 pages each, spreadsheets in English about system vulnerabilities, programming codes that could very well be Egyptian hieroglyphs. "Your first task," said Hugh, with the smile that definitely wasn't friendly, "is to analyze these security vulnerabilities and present a comprehensive report by Thursday. John wants to see if you really understand. How did you put it in the lecture? Ah, yes, about holes and falls." "Thursday," repeated Elke, calculating mentally. 4 days to decipher the digital equivalent of the Da Vinci Code. "Problem?" Hugh tilted his head, like a cat playing with a mouse. "No problem at all," she replied, because giving up at the first difficulty wasn't an option. Martha Eppinger hadn't raised a daughter who retreated when things got difficult. When Hugh left, closing the door with a click that sounded too final, Elke looked at the mountain of paper and felt the weight of reality. She had gotten herself into something much bigger than she had imagined. But there was also something that Hugh didn't know about her. Elke Eppinger had learned to survive by being underestimated. "Excuse me," said a gentle voice at the door, which she had left ajar. Elke looked up and saw a man of about 65, impeccable security uniform, well-groomed grey hair, paternal smile that seemed genuine in a sea of corporate artificiality. "Mr. Edgar," he introduced himself, making a small bow. "Reception, security, and occasionally unofficial advisor to lost newcomers. And you, young lady, look like you urgently need coffee." "I need a miracle," she replied, laughing despite her despair. "Coffee is a good start. We build miracles little by little. Come, I'll show you where the really important things are. The coffee machine that doesn't steal your money, the loo that has toilet paper, and the emergency stairs." Not necessarily in that order of priority. As they walked through the endless corridors, Mr. Edgar whispered with the wisdom of someone who had seen a lot in 25 years with the company. "Between us, half these people don't even know what they really do. They talk nicely, use complicated words, make PowerPoint presentations that would make NASA envious, but when push comes to shove," he shrugged, "it's all smoke and mirrors. You seem different." "How so?" "You asked a real question to the boss. Nobody's done that in years. Everyone here treats him like he's a technology god, but you looked at him as if he were just a man. And that, young lady, is a rare thing around these parts." At that moment, as if he had heard his name being whispered by the corporate gods, John appeared in the corridor. Dark grey suit that cost more than Elke's car, if she had one, hair perfectly combed even after a 3-hour meeting, an aura of command that made people automatically make way and lower their voices. But when his eyes met hers, Elke noticed something different. Tiredness, perhaps, or curiosity. Hard to say. "Elke, how are you adapting to our little organized chaos?" She looked at him directly, deciding that honesty would be her only weapon in that place full of games and masks. "To be completely honest, I feel like I've been thrown into the Pacific Ocean and asked to swim to Japan without a life jacket and without knowing how to swim properly. but I haven't drowned yet, so technically everything's fine." John almost smiled. Mr. Edgar, observing the interaction, made a small mental note. In 25 years, he had never seen the boss almost smile at a new employee. "Welcome to the real corporate world," said John. "Did Hugh explain the first task?" "He did. A pile of documents that seems to have been designed specifically to make me question my life choices and possibly my mental sanity. And will you question them?" Elke looked him directly in the grey eyes, seeing in them a challenge that went far beyond the professional. "Not on your life." This time he really smiled, just one corner of his mouth too quick for any security camera to capture, but she saw it, and she felt something strange in her stomach, as if she had just won a prize she didn't know she wanted. "Excellent. I expect your report Thursday at 9 in the morning. And Elke?" "Yes? If you need help, don't ask. It's part of the test." When he walked away with steps that echoed confidence through the marble corridor, Mr. Edgar shook his head with the wisdom of someone who had seen many corporate storms. 25 years working here, 3 different presidents, 5 financial crises, and I've never seen him smile at an intern. You must have some special magic, young lady." Elke looked in the direction where John had disappeared, feeling that she had gotten herself into something much more complicated than a simple internship. She had the growing feeling that she was in a game whose rules she didn't know, playing against an opponent she couldn't decipher, betting with cards she didn't know if she had. But if there was one thing that simple life in Chorlton had taught her, it was that the best prizes always came from the most frightening challenges. And for some reason she couldn't explain, she was beginning to suspect that John Adler was the most frightening and fascinating a challenge she had ever encountered. Thursday arrived with a storm that seemed to perfectly reflect Elke's emotional state. She had spent 4 nights practically without sleep, deciphering codes as if she were an archaeologist exploring Egyptian hieroglyphs, reading about system vulnerabilities until her eyes burned, trying to understand a completely strange universe where bytes and firewalls determined the fate of millions of pounds. The report was ready, 12 pages that she had rewritten 6 times, trying to balance professionalism with personality, technical knowledge with human insights. Daphne had slept on the sofa 2 consecutive nights, so as not to interrupt her friend's academic madness ritual, feeding her strong coffee and words of encouragement. "You look like a zombie," commented Mr. Edgar when she passed reception at 7 in the morning, carrying a cardboard folder she had bought from the corner shop. "I feel like a zombie that might be about to be devoured by hungry executives." "I doubt it," Mr. Edgar winked conspiratorially. "John's been strange since Monday. More, I don't know, human. Yesterday he asked how my granddaughter was. In 25 years he's never asked about my family." The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp, in the glass room she had observed from afar during the week, like an aquarium where corporate sharks swam in circles. Through the transparent walls, she could see John, Hugh, and other executives she hadn't met yet, all of them looking like they'd stepped out of an expensive cologne advert. When she entered the room, the silence was immediate and heavy. 7 men in impeccable suits, a tempered glass table that probably cost more than her university fees, air conditioning that maintained perfect temperature, and her with her blazer borrowed from Daphne and confidence she was desperately trying to maintain. "Elke!" John gestured to the chair beside him, a movement that didn't go unnoticed by the others present. "Ready to present your findings to us?" She took a deep breath, opened her improvised folder, and made a choice that would change everything. "Do you want me to be diplomatically technical or brutally honest?" Hugh coughed, visibly embarrassed. The other executives exchanged glances that ranged from curiosity to alarm. "Honest," replied John, and something in his tone, a mixture of challenge and genuine expectation, encouraged her. "Right then, so you have a serious problem. And it's not technical, it's human. She stood up, went to the whiteboard on the wall, and began drawing circles and arrows as if she were in a preparatory course class, completely unconscious that she was challenging corporate protocols that had existed for decades. You've built an incredible castle, very high walls, deep moats full of malicious codes, watchtowers that monitor every byte that comes in and goes out. But you forgot one fundamental thing. Who's watching the watchers themselves? "What exactly do you mean?" asked one of the executives, Dr. Morrison, compliance specialist. "Hugh," she turned to the director of operations, who had visibly paled, "during these 4 days, you gave me access to files I shouldn't have had. I managed to enter systems that were supposed to be blocked for interns. Not because I'm a computing genius, because I definitely am not, but because you're so worried about building defenses against external threats that you didn't notice the internal vulnerabilities." The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. Hugh was visibly uncomfortable, adjusting his tie as if it had transformed into a rope. "What exactly are you insinuating?" he asked, with a tone that barely concealed irritation and something more dangerous, fear. "I'm not insinuating anything. I'm stating," Elke returned to her chair, heart racing but determined to finish what she had started, "that perhaps the biggest problem isn't building higher walls, but understanding why some people inside the castle itself seem interested in opening the gates for invaders." The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Elke had just indirectly accused Hugh of corporate treason in front of Iron Wall's entire executive board. John was completely motionless, observing her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously transparent and protected. "Continue," he said simply, but there was something dangerous in his voice. "I don't understand complex codes, but I understand human behavior, and discontented, ambitious or compromised people are the biggest security risk that exists. You can have the best systems in the world, but if someone inside decides to consciously collaborate with an external threat, all the firewalls in the universe won't help at all." The silence was now broken only by the sound of rain against the panoramic windows. Hugh had not only paled, he was visibly sweating. "Interesting theory," murmured John, but his eyes never left Hugh's face. "Do you have concrete evidence, or are these just well-founded suppositions?" Elke opened her improvised folder and spread printouts across the glass table as if she were assembling a jigsaw puzzle. Access logs at suspicious times, emails redirected by mistake to external accounts, confidential files that disappeared and reappeared modified, passwords changed without justification in the system. Individually, each thing might seem like an accident or technical failure. Together, well, either you have the most unlucky and technologically unstable system in the world, or someone is playing a very dangerous game with information worth millions. The meeting ended in tense silence that seemed electrified. When everyone began to leave, only John and Elke remained in the room, like gladiators in an arena after battle. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" he asked, standing up and walking to the window. "Probably sacked myself before even completing a week of work. You just identified an internal conspiracy that my own security team, with all their PhDs and international certifications, couldn't detect in 6 months of investigation." Elke stared at him, completely confused. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing for me?" "For you? Very, very good. For Hugh?" John smiled, but it definitely wasn't a gentle smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just confirmed the location of its prey. "Let's say he's going to have some very interesting explanations to give in the next few hours." That afternoon, Elke was organizing some papers in her little windowless room when she heard raised voices coming from the meeting room. Through the glass walls, she could see Hugh gesticulating defensively while John remained motionless, but their facial expressions suggested a conversation that was anything but friendly. At 6 in the evening, when she was preparing to leave, she found John waiting by the lift. "Need a lift?" he asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "My bus arrives in 10 minutes. she replied, though she was soaked by the tropical rain battering Manchester. "Get in the car, Elke." It's not a request. The journey to her house was initially silent, but not uncomfortable. The BMW glided through the flooded streets, while John drove with the precision that characterized everything in his life. "You're absolutely nothing like what I expected," he said finally, when they stopped at the traffic lights on Oxford Road. "What did you expect exactly? A girl dazzled by money and power, someone who would be intimidated at the first difficulty and run back home with her tail between her legs. Sorry to disappoint your expectations." "You didn't disappoint me." He looked at her directly, and she saw something in his grey eyes that made her forget to breathe for a second. "You surprised me completely, and that, Elke, hasn't happened to me for a very, very long time." When they arrived in front of the simple building where she lived, Elke hesitated before getting out. Was Hugh really sabotaging the company? 6 months ago, we received reports that confidential information was leaking to competitors. We hired 3 different auditing companies. All failed to identify the source. You managed it in 4 days. And now? Now Hugh Matthews is going to discover that corporate treason isn't just dismissal for just cause. It's a criminal process that can result in prison. When Elke got out of the car, she didn't know that Hugh had spent the entire afternoon trying to erase digital traces and planning revenge that would involve not only her career, but her personal reputation. And she didn't know that John had stayed awake until late that night, walking around his empty penthouse, thinking about a girl in worn trainers who had managed to do something that thousands of pounds in specialized consultancies couldn't. See through all the defenses he had built, both professional and personal. The game had changed completely, and neither of them was minimally prepared for the storm that was about to descend upon their lives. Friday began with Hugh Matthews calling an emergency meeting with Iron Wall's minority shareholders. Elke only knew this because Mr. Edgar had ears strategically positioned in all the company's corridors and a natural talent for being in the right place at the right time. "That girl is dangerous to our company's stability," Hugh was saying in the executive meeting room, believing that nobody else could hear. 1 week here and she's already creating unfounded conspiracy theories, destabilizing the team, questioning our internal security without any real technical knowledge. It's obvious that John is being influenced by reasons that have nothing to do with professional competence. The insinuation was clear and disgusting. Elke was in the Dead Files archive, organizing old documents, her new task after Thursday's bombshell, when she heard determined footsteps in the corridor. John appeared at the door with an expression she hadn't seen yet, a dangerous mixture of controlled anger and something that seemed like protection. "I need to talk to you. Now. If it's to officially sack me, you can be quick. I have a public policy class at 2 and don't want to be late. Nobody's going to sack you, but I need you to know that things are going to get significantly more complicated in the next few hours." He entered the archive and closed the door. The space suddenly became very small and too intimate, and Elke felt her heart accelerate for reasons she preferred not to analyze. "Hugh wasn't exactly satisfied with your presentation yesterday." "I imagine not. Accusing someone of corporate treason mustn't be his favorite breakfast." "Elke," John's voice became serious, almost vulnerable. "Do you really understand the gravity of what you discovered?" "Honestly, not completely. I just connected dots that were scattered in front of me. I didn't expect them to form such an ugly and dangerous picture." John approached, and she could smell his discreet cologne, something expensive and masculine, mixed with the smell of strong coffee that seemed to be part of his personality. "Hugh isn't just trying to sabotage isolated projects. He's trying to remove me from the company's executive leadership. The Nasdaq IPO is scheduled for December, and he wants to be occupying the presidency when that happens. An operation potentially worth $200 million. And I simply entered the middle of this corporate war without even knowing it existed." "You didn't enter by chance. You were strategically placed." John hesitated, as if fighting against his own words. "And there's something you absolutely need to know about this." At that moment, Elke's phone rang with a notification. "Urgent message from Daphne. Your new influencer friend posted something about you. You better see this now." With her heart tightening with a bad feeling, Elke opened Instagram. Lauren Adler, John's sister, had posted a photo of her getting out of the BMW the previous night, apparently taken from afar with zoom, with the venomous caption, "Interesting to observe the type of strategic talent my brother's been recruiting for the family company. Is it about professional competence or other kinds of skills? New times, just merit. Corporate transparency." The post already had 1,500 likes and hundreds of progressively more malicious and invasive comments. "Your sister," said Elke, showing the phone to John with hands that trembled slightly with contained anger. His expression closed completely, transforming into something she recognized as pure fury. Lauren had absolutely no right to do this. Didn't she? Elke felt anger explode like a volcano. "Because to me it seems like your entire family thinks they have total right to judge, humiliate, and publicly expose me. My family is complicated." "All families are complicated, John. The difference is that mine doesn't have social media with 50,000 followers to humiliate and destroy the reputation of innocent strangers." At that exact moment, as if the universe had a dramatically perverse sense of timing, the door opened abruptly. Hugh entered, accompanied by 2 corporate security guards she didn't know. "So very sorry to interrupt this intimate conversation," said Hugh with a smile that managed to be simultaneously cordial and threatening. "But the executive board has unanimously decided that we need to conduct a complete and impartial investigation into the serious accusations made against my person and professional integrity. And while this investigation is ongoing, Miss Eppinger cannot have any kind of access to the company's confidential files." "You can't do this," said John, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "Actually, I can and must. The board voted democratically. 3 votes in favor, 2 against. Very democratic." Hugh smiled coldly. "Elke, your personal belongings are being carefully collected at this moment. You'll receive generous compensation and an adequate reference letter." "Considering the circumstances, how immensely generous," she replied with irony that could cut glass. "This definitely isn't going to stay like this," said John, taking a threatening step towards Hugh. "Of course it won't." Hugh turned to him with renewed confidence. "You can and should exercise your legal right of veto as majority founder of the company. But then we'll have to explain in detail to our international investors why you're protecting so passionately an unqualified intern who clearly has other very specific interests here besides professional development." The insinuation was as clear as it was disgusting. Elke felt her face burn with humiliation and anger. "You're a miserable coward," she said to Hugh with a calmness that scared even herself, "and a pathetically amateur conspirator. Because if I, a simple student without technical knowledge, discovered your schemes in 5 days, imagine what a real professional forensic audit will find when it starts looking seriously. Empty threats don't look good on such an ambitious and determined young woman." John took a decisive step towards Hugh, but Elke held his arm firmly. "No, it's not worth the effort or the consequences." She took her bag, the only personal thing she had in that place, and walked with dignity towards the door. "Elke," John called, and there was something desperate in his voice. She turned one last time. "Thank you for the educational opportunity. It was revealing in several aspects I hadn't even imagined." When the lift doors closed, Elke finally allowed herself to feel complete humiliation. 1 week. She had lasted exactly 1 week in the sophisticated and cruel world of John Adler. And the worst part wasn't being unfairly sacked or publicly humiliated. The worst part was the devastating sensation that she had left something deeply important unfinished, something that could have been special if the world were a fairer place. On the 33rd floor, John was standing at the panoramic window, observing the city stretch out below like a chessboard, when Mr. Edgar appeared discreetly at the door. "Boss, with all the respect you deserve, you've just made the biggest mistake of your entire life." "How so?" "That girl is special in a way that appears once every decade, and you let them take her away from here without fighting as you should have." John continued looking through the window, but his jaw was visibly tense. "It's more complicated than it seems, Edgar." "Love is always complicated, boss," said Mr. Edgar with the simplicity of someone who had seen life pass by for 25 years. "The question isn't whether it's complicated. The question is whether it's worth fighting for." "Who said anything about love?" "Nobody needs to say anything. It's written on your face since Monday morning, and if I may make the observation, I've never seen you so alive." That night, John was completely alone in his automated 300-square-meter penthouse, playing his mother's melancholic score on the grand piano for the first time in months. And for the first time in his adult life, the music sounded deeply, devastatingly sad. On the other side of the city, in the small flat in Chorlton, Elke was telling Daphne and her mother Martha, who had arrived by bus as soon as she heard about the trouble, everything that had happened, carefully omitting only the most disturbing and confusing detail, that at some point during that absolutely crazy week she had started caring about John Adler much more than any common sense would recommend. The game had apparently ended before it had even really begun. Or at least, that's what both desperately tried to convince themselves that lonely night. But neither Elke nor John knew that Mr. Edgar had spent the entire night making strategic phone calls, that Lauren was having her first crisis of conscience in years, and that Hugh Matthews had made a fatal error, completely underestimating the power of a determined woman who had absolutely nothing to lose. The real war was just beginning. 3 weeks after what Daphne had dubbed the Iron Wall Massacre, Elke was at a table in Central Cafe in Manchester city centre, mentally preparing for a job interview at a digital inclusion NGO, when Daphne came running with her phone in hand and the face of someone who had seen a ghost. "You need to see this now," she said, breathless, practically throwing the phone on the table and knocking over Elke's coffee cup. On the screen, a headline in large letters: "Corporate Scandal Rocks Iron Wall. Director arrested for industrial espionage and systematic sabotage attempt." Elke read the entire news story with a mixture of bitter satisfaction and deep relief. Hugh had been caught red-handed trying to sell confidential information about system vulnerabilities to a competing international conglomerate. The criminal investigation, initiated after detailed and well-founded internal reports, had revealed a scheme of corruption and corporate treason that had lasted at least 8 months. "You were right about absolutely everything," said Daphne, sitting down and ordering a coffee for herself. "About Hugh, about the sabotage, about everything." "Being right doesn't pay rent or buy food," replied Elke. But inside she felt a strange and deep relief. At least she wasn't completely mad or paranoid. But it's quite a satisfaction to see that scoundrel being led away in handcuffs. That afternoon, Elke was leaving the interview, which had gone surprisingly well, when she found Mr. Edgar waiting patiently on the pavement, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Miss Elke, may I have the privilege of speaking with you for a few minutes?" "Mr. Edgar, how did you find me here?" "I have my particular investigative methods," he smiled mysteriously, "and some strategic connections around the city. The boss very much wants to speak with you." "The boss has had 3 whole weeks to speak to me if he wanted to. He's been busy cleaning up all the dirty mess that Hugh left, dealing with completely nervous international investors, desperately trying to save the IPO that almost went to space." Mr. Edgar made a significant pause. "And suffering like an abandoned dog in the rain, but he wouldn't admit that even under medieval torture." Elke laughed, despite the irritation she still felt. "Where is he right now?" "At the company, as always. Working late, trying to solve problems. Only now he keeps looking constantly at that little windowless room where you used to be, as if expecting you to magically appear." "Mr. Edgar, I know. I know perfectly well. It's not my business to meddle in personal affairs. He raised his hands in surrender. But in 25 years working for this family, I've never seen the lad so human, so vulnerable. You affected him in a way that not even he can properly understand. An hour later, against all her self-preservation instincts, Elke was in Ironwall's lift, going up to a confrontation she didn't know if she wanted to have. The building was practically empty, only a few lights still on in the upper floors, creating an almost ghostly atmosphere. She found John exactly where Mr. Edgar had said, in the glass room, completely alone, surrounded by papers and documents, looking like someone who hadn't slept properly for weeks. I came to return this, she said without preamble, placing the visitor's badge on the glass table. He looked up slowly, and she could see deep tiredness, genuine relief, and something more complex that scared and attracted her simultaneously. You don't need to return anything. The badge is legitimately yours. I don't work here anymore, if you remember that part of the story. Hugh has been arrested, formally charged with corporate treason, industrial espionage, and gang formation. I know. I read it in detail in the newspaper and on social media. The criminal investigation began exactly because of your report. You literally saved this company, Elke. Good for all of you. John stood up slowly, walked around the table, and stopped a few centimeters from her, close enough for her to feel the heat emanating from his body. I'm officially offering you your job back. I don't want it. I'm offering you a permanent position on the executive board. I don't want that either. Then what the hell do you want from me? The question came out with a desperate intensity that caught them both completely by surprise. Elke looked at him directly, feeling courage arise from somewhere deep inside her. I want a real and complete explanation about why you didn't defend me when you should have, about why you let them publicly humiliate me, about why you waited 3 weeks to appear, and mainly, I want to understand why the hell I'm here instead of being at home, trying to forget you exist. John ran his hand through his hair, messing up his always perfect hairstyle for the first time since she'd known him. Because I'm a pathetic emotional coward. The brutal and unexpected honesty of the answer completely disarmed her. Since my mother died when I was 22, I've built emotional walls around absolutely everything. Business, people, feelings, possibilities. It worked perfectly for 10 whole years. It made me what I am professionally. And then you appeared, with your absurd question about failures, and systematically began tearing everything down, brick by brick, defense by defense. John, when Hugh took you away from here, I should have fought. I should have defended you publicly in front of everyone. I should have put my position at risk, if necessary, but I was completely terrified. Afraid of what, exactly? Of admitting that you had become too important for my mental sanity, of recognizing that for the first time in my adult life I was feeling something I couldn't control or resolve with pure logic. The silence that followed was charged with an almost palpable electricity. Elke felt her heart race uncontrollably. And now, she asked in a voice that came out lower and more vulnerable than she intended, now I'm here at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, pathetically begging an extraordinary 23-year-old girl to give me a second chance I probably don't deserve at all. Elke took 2 strategic steps backwards, creating physical distance to be able to think with a minimum of clarity. You know your family viscerally hates me, right? My family will learn to respect you or will have to deal with me. Your partners in Manchester's high society think him an unscrupulous opportunist. My partners in high society can collectively go to hell. And you, she looked at him directly without blinking, what do you honestly think I am? John approached again, slowly, as if she were something precious that could break with sudden movements. I think you're the most courageous and authentic woman I've ever had the privilege to know. I think you're intelligent in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with diplomas or academic titles. I think you have a heart too generous for your own good. And I think, he hesitated, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him, that I'm completely and irremediably in love with you. The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge neither knew if they had the courage to cross. "John, I know it's complete madness. I know we're from worlds that seem incompatible. I know you have every right in the world to send me to hell and never look back. That's true. I have all those rights. You do. And I also have the right to do this." She approached decisively and kissed him. The kiss began hesitant, almost fearful, but intensified quickly when she felt his strong arms around her waist, pulling her closer as if she were the only real thing in a world of illusions. It was a kiss that carried 3 weeks of anguishing longing, 1 week of poorly disguised sexual tension, and years of emotional loneliness from both sides. When they finally separated, they were both breathless and slightly dizzy. "This changes absolutely everything," he murmured against her lips. "I very much hope so." But the moment was brutally interrupted by the familiar sound of the lift opening. Lauren Adler emerged like a perfumed and furious storm, all dressed in impeccable white, eyes sparkling with a mixture of anger and something that seemed regret. "So, it's true what they're saying," she said, looking alternately from John to Elke. "My brother really is getting emotionally involved with her." "Lauren," John's voice carried a tone of dangerous warning. "No, John. Someone needs to have the courage to say some truths here." Lauren turned directly to Elke. "Do you really think you're clever enough, that you can seduce my brother and simply enter our family as if nothing happened?" "Your family?" Elke laughed, but it definitely wasn't a happy sound. "You know what, Lauren? After everything that happened, I have no interest in entering a family that treats me the way you treated me. At least you have some notion of your social place. I do. And my place is being disrespected and publicly humiliated by a spoiled girl who's never worked a single day in her life and thinks an expensive surname is a substitute for character." Lauren became visibly livid. "How dare you speak to me like that? Lauren, enough, immediately." John positioned himself physically between the two women. "Elke doesn't deserve this, and you know it. And do I deserve to see you destroy your reputation and our family because of a passing adventure? An adventure?" Elke felt her blood literally boil in her veins. "You know what? You really deserve each other. An entire family of cold, calculating and emotionally empty people who think money buys character and that social status substitutes human decency." She turned determinedly to leave, but John held her hand with desperate gentleness. "Don't go away. Not again, please. Give me one convincing reason to stay." "Because I love you in a way I didn't even know was possible," he said simply in front of his horrified sister. "And because you love me too, even if you don't want to or can't admit it now." Elke looked at him, then at Lauren, then back at him, feeling her heart break and rebuild simultaneously. "You're right. I do love you," she said, feeling the words come out with more ease and truth than she expected. "But loving someone doesn't mean passively accepting being treated like disposable rubbish by his family." She freed herself gently and walked with all the dignity she could muster towards the lift. "If you really love me, John, truly, you're going to have to make a definitive choice between the comfortable and predictable world you've always known and the terrifying possibility of something completely real." The lift doors closed, leaving the siblings alone in the glass room, in a silence that seemed to echo for all eternity. "I hope you're happy with yourself," said Lauren after a few minutes. "You just lost an extraordinary woman because of me." John looked at her, genuinely surprised. "What did you say? Do you think I'm emotionally blind? The way she looks at you, how you become different when she's around, how you smile genuinely for the first time in years." Lauren sighed deeply. "I was afraid, John, terribly afraid that she would make you forget about me, about our family, about our world." "Lauren, but I just witnessed a woman love you enough to force you to choose between what's right and what's comfortable. And that's exactly the kind of courageous person you deserve in your life." That endless night, Elke cried for the first time since she had left Ironwall. Not from anger or humiliation, but from pure and devastating sadness, because she had painfully discovered that sometimes love isn't enough to overcome all the differences and obstacles that the world puts in the way. And John stayed awake until dawn, sitting at the piano, staring fixedly at his mother's sheet music, finally understanding with brutal clarity the difference between building emotional walls to protect himself and having enough courage to destroy them completely in the name of true happiness. Epilogue. 2 months later, on a sunny Sunday morning that promised to be scorching even by Yorkshire standards, Elke was at her grandmother Gertrude's house in the countryside, in the small town of Hagen, helping to reorganize the garden that had been devastated by the last hailstorm, when she heard the unmistakable sound of an expensive engine completely out of place in the rural silence. A black BMW, impeccably clean despite the red dirt road, stopped carefully in front of the blue-painted wooden gate. John got out of the car slowly, visibly displaced and hesitant in his dark jeans and white dress shirt in the middle of that bucolic scenery, carrying a generous bouquet of wildflowers and a leather briefcase that seemed to contain important documents. "Hello," he said, with a simplicity that managed to be simultaneously casual and vulnerable. Elke didn't respond immediately, just observed him with curiosity and caution as he walked uncertainly through the beaten earth yard, clearly out of his natural element, to where she was kneeling among lettuce and tomato plants. "I came to bring a job proposal." He extended the briefcase carefully, as if making a peace offering. "I don't need that anymore, John. I'm very well where I am now." And it was true. She had got the job at the NGO Digital Connection, was coordinating an ambitious digital inclusion project for rural communities forgotten by public authorities, had a modest but dignified salary, and for the first time in months could sleep peacefully, without nightmares about boardrooms and corporate conspiracies. "Read first, then send me away if you want." Curious despite all her self-preservation instincts, she opened the briefcase. Inside, impressively elaborate official documents for the creation of the Selina Adler Foundation for Digital Inclusion and Social Development, with her officially listed as Executive Director, with a salary that made her choke slightly. "An entire foundation?" she asked, leafing through the detailed papers. "With an annual budget of £5 million to start, total administrative autonomy for your projects, complete freedom to hire staff, and zero interference from me or any family member or iron wall." Elke studied him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. "What's the real catch?" "There's no catch at all. It's a completely serious and legitimate professional proposal." He hesitated, looking like a nervous teenager. "With a completely idiotic and desperate personal hope behind it." At that strategic moment, Grandmother Gertrude appeared on the wooden veranda, drying her hands on her flowered apron and observing the scene with experienced eyes that had already seen much of life. "Elke, who's this city lad?" "Grandma, this is John. John, my grandmother Gertrude." "Very pleased to meet you, Mrs. Gertrude." He approached respectfully, removing an imaginary hat. "You have an absolutely extraordinary granddaughter." "I know that very well, lad," replied the lady, observing him with the sagacity of someone who had raised 5 children and 14 grandchildren. "The important question is, do you really know that?" "I'm learning every day." Grandmother Gertrude smiled for the first time. "Come in then, young man. I'll make strong coffee, and you're going to tell me properly what your true intentions are with my girl." Throughout the entire afternoon, Elke watched, fascinated, as John sat comfortably on the rustic wooden veranda, drinking strong coffee from an old enamel mug, listening with genuine patience to Grandmother Gertrude tell endless stories about the family, about the difficult times on the farm, about droughts and abundant times, about lost and found loves. He had taken off his expensive shoes and was barefoot on the burnt cement floor, completely relaxed in a rural simplicity she had never imagined in him. Even more impressive, he seemed genuinely interested in the stories, asking intelligent questions about agriculture, about local history, about life in the countryside. "Your grandmother is a woman of impressive wisdom," he commented, when they were finally alone in the yard, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink over the golden fields. "And you're incredibly stubborn." "I am indeed, but this time for a reason that's completely worthwhile." Elke turned to face him directly, trying to read his expressions. "What do you really want from me, John? Really? You, us. A real chance to build something authentic, without corporate games, without wounded pride, without fear of being vulnerable. And your family? Your sister who publicly humiliated me? Lauren is doing intensive therapy. She discovered some things about herself she didn't like very much. Dad will take considerable time, but he'll end up getting used to it or will have to deal with me. And Grandma Elizabeth said something very interesting the other day. What was it? That real family isn't who's born biologically with you, but who consciously chooses to stay by your side when everything gets really difficult." Elke felt her heart race dangerously. "And why should I believe that this time it's going to be genuinely different?" In response, John stood up and walked to the BMW. He returned a few minutes later, carefully carrying a portable digital piano she hadn't seen him take. "Because this time I brought something I've never shown to any other person in my life." He connected the instrument to the veranda socket, adjusted the volume and began to play. The melody was delicate and melancholic, but at the same time full of luminous hope that made the heart ache. "It was my mother's," he said, without interrupting the music that flowed like crystal water. "She composed this piece for my father when they met, still very young. It's about having enough courage to truly love, even when the whole world seems to be conspiring against you." Tears came without warning, rolling down Elke's face like summer rain. She sat beside him on the improvised bench, feeling the warmth of his body, the concentrated intensity with which he played. "Why are you showing me this now? Because I want you to know with absolute certainty that I'm not here to impress you with money, power, or empty promises. I'm here showing you the most vulnerable and sacred part of me, hoping you have enough courage for us to try again." When the music ended, the countryside silence enveloped them like an embrace. Crickets beginning their nocturnal concert, gentle wind swaying the fruit trees, and two hearts beating in a rhythm that finally seemed synchronized. "The foundation is completely real?" she asked, breaking the spell. "Absolutely real, with or without us together romantically. And if I accept the job but don't accept you, then he'll have to learn to work collaboratively with a broken heart. But at least he'll know you're doing exactly what you love and deserve to do." Elke laughed through her tears, feeling something inside her chest open like a flower after a long time closed. "You really have changed, haven't you? You changed me, completely." She kissed him under the starry countryside sky, unhurriedly this time, without fear, savoring the promise of all the kisses yet to come, all the dawns they could share. 6 months later, the Selina Adler Foundation had brought free internet and digital training programs to more than 80 rural communities throughout Yorkshire. Elke was on the cover of The Guardian magazine as one of the most influential and innovative young people in the country in the field of social inclusion. And John had learned, through attempts, errors, and much patient love, that life's best conquests didn't come from mathematical codes or complex algorithms, but from the extraordinary courage to show yourself completely vulnerable to the right person. Their wedding was simple but moving, held at Grandmother Gertrude's own farm, with rustic chic decoration, live music, and homemade food that fed both body and soul. "Mr. Edgar was best man. I brought these two stubborn ones together. I have acquired rights. Daphne was maid of honor, and I warned she was mad, but thank God everything worked out." And Grandmother Gertrude gave the final matrimonial advice with the wisdom of her 83 years. "Marriage, my dears, is exactly like tending a garden. Every blessed day you have to water with care, pull out the bad weeds that insist on growing, protect from pests and storms. But when it finally bears fruit, it feeds and nourishes your entire life." At the party, Lauren discreetly approached Elke during the couple's waltz. "I need to apologize to you," she said, with a humility that visibly cost her dearly, "for everything. for the humiliation, for the malicious posts, for trying to sabotage your happiness out of pure selfishness and insecurity. Lauren, you brought my brother back to life. He's happier than I've seen him in 10 years. And that's a gift I didn't know our family needed so much. Elke hugged her, feeling that finally all wounds were healing. 3 years later, when their first child was born, a boy with bright brown eyes who inherited his mother's insatiable curiosity and his father's calculated determination, John was in the delivery room, holding Elke's hand, remembering the question that had changed everything. "Have you ever failed, sir?" And he finally had a complete answer. "Yes, many times. But I learned that sometimes you need to fail completely to discover what really matters in life." On the birth certificate, the chosen name was Gabriel Eppinger Adler, and on the line stating the mother's profession, it was written with pride. Executive Director of the Selina Adler Foundation and woman who taught a billionaire to love. So, did you enjoy this love story that began with a simple question and ended up transforming 2 lives completely? If you made it this far and were moved by Elke and John's story, how about giving this content a like and subscribing to the channel? Don't forget to ring the bell to receive notifications of new stories. Your interaction is fundamental so that other people like you can discover and be moved by romantic narratives full of drama, comedy, and mainly, lots of heart. Each like, comment and share helps take these stories to those who also need a good dose of romance and hope in life. Thank you for reading to the end, and until the next story that will make your heart race.